Hey guys, Luke and Todd here from the Scoundrel's Cantina, and welcome to another video. In this video, we'll be sharing our thoughts about the first season of The Mandalorian and why we think that it's mediocre at best and very overrated. Over the years before Disney's takeover of Star Wars, there's been so much absolutely amazing Star Wars content that has come out which didn't have 1/10 of the budget that The Mandalorian has. The series gets $15 million per episode and is just meh in comparison to most previous Star Wars stories. That is a whole lot of money that projects that were cancelled could have used and delivered much better content and storytelling in general. With that said, we know a lot of people are unable to hear a different opinion, but at least hear us out before you make up your mind or pretend to know our point of view, which you don't. Some people love to come up with their own conclusions about us despite not actually knowing us at all. So anyway, let's begin.
We'll be honest with you guys, Lucasfilm under Disney has literally killed our excitement for anything Star Wars. The last thing we cared about after Rogue One, Star Wars Rebels, and Jedi Fallen Order was the final season of the Clone Wars, but after that we said that we were done, and we are, because we don't care anymore at all. All of this is thanks to the Hollywood indoctrination put to the screens where only their agenda that we normal people do not support or agree with matters, and not to mention attacking your customers for not sharing the same point of view yet preaching tolerance whenever you open your mouth. We remember everything and will not so easily forget what they did, what they're still doing, and what they're planning on doing. Anything even slightly tainted with identity politics trash will not be supported by us, period. What our constructive criticism would be for the Mandalorian series is to keep it away from anything sequel trilogy related and completely ignore it, because if it doesn't, we just can't take it seriously at all because we know where it's leading. If it just ignores it, it can literally coexist with the EU after Return of the Jedi by our opinion, which would be a nice fit for people who don't consider Episode 6 as the happy ending of the Star Wars story like we do. The Mandalorian has gotten a whole amount of praise as being the best thing since Return of the Jedi, so after hearing a whole lot of stuff like that, we decided to share our opinion on its first season, which to us was really nothing special at all. The show offers nothing new that we haven't seen before in Star Wars, and constantly has the need to remind you that you are watching Star Wars by a huge number of Easter eggs from the real stuff. And don't use the argument that it's to bring you into Star Wars, as we heard that before with The Crap Awakens and seen the whole nostalgia shit 10 times over since Disney bought Star Wars. It's really getting old. There are almost no new designs and concepts in the show, and when they are, they feel more like Star Trek or a random sci-fi series, although we admit the Razer crest looks nice as it reminds us of the LAATs which we adore. Now, despite Lucasfilm's constant crap about letting the past die, they sure are always close to the original trilogy era in order to milk some nostalgia onto our screens. Why we find the series to be half boring and mostly overrated is because of the constant long slow scenes of the Mandalorian walking or just a ship flying or something. There is very little dialogue in the episodes, very little character development, and it feels like there's no real plot apart from the Mandalorian collecting a bounty, deciding not to turn it in, and then fighting the Imperial Remnant which wants it, along with a whole lot of fill-in time-wasting episodes. Do they have so little ideas that they waste most of the episodes in nice cinematography that lasts forever, or shots of the Mandalorian's T-visor because it's cool and characters looking at each other and stuff like that gives no depth and story to it but just wastes time? Isn't the first season of The Mandalorian at least supposed to introduce you to his character, apart from him just being a mass supposed badass who was taken by the Death Watch to be a Mandalorian like them and has a soft spot for cute things? We enjoyed the first episode for what it was, although after the second it already felt like a filler episode more than anything else. It was as if The Mandalorian doesn't have a story but just constant side quests with no point. And in the end, out of 8 episodes, at least half of them were fillers. And let's not forget the constant stupid desert planets, as if the morons at Disney have only seen the first half of A New Hope and nothing else. In almost every Disney Star Wars movie, apart from The Last Jedi, there was a desert planet. George Lucas gave it his all to create something new in each of his Star Wars films, which also applies to both of his Clone Wars series from 2003 and 2008, but Disney is just lazy. I mean, take a look at the walrus beast in the first episode, the obvious rhino in the second, the small lizards, and the frogs. Why do most of the animals in The Mandalorian look almost the same like real life ones instead of them looking like something from Star Wars? In only a few short years, Disney was able to make the galaxy far, far away feel like a galaxy based only on our planet. Year by year, the Star Wars galaxy gets more content, but it feels like it's constantly shrinking. Also, let's not forget about how the non-George Lucas Star Wars keeps on shitting the original 6 movies with almost everything sequel trilogy related. First is with the Mandalorian having carbonite chambers in his ship, yet only 6 years ago, which was 3 years after the Battle of Yavin, Boba Fett didn't know if Han would survive the freezing process, and the carbon freezing chamber itself was bigger than the Razer crest. But now suddenly, all the bounty hunters use carbonite freezing chambers on their ships to collect bounties because Lucasfilm thinks it's iconic, even though it doesn't make sense story-wise. There has to be a much bigger time gap in order for that to spread. Also, the little 50-year-old Yoda species is still an infant. By some basic logic, if it's an infant of 50, which makes it about a year old in our years, then it should be a young adult at around 900 years old. This totally takes a crap on how old Yoda is and how much it took him to grow up. Also, Yoda's age in the originals had nothing to do with how much he actually lived, but to give an impression of how wise and experienced he was. This Baby Yoda thing basically shows that Yoda shouldn't be old and dying at 900, and of course it uses the Force pretty well without any training whatsoever, just like the garbage Rey character from the sequels. That's Disney's Star Wars. Everyone has the Force without training, but get used to almost never seeing a lightsaber, and especially not a decent lightsaber battle, despite the millions invested into making movies and TV shows by Disney. Despite everything here, we somewhat enjoy the first season for what it was, but it greatly lacks in character development, storytelling, dialogue, and most importantly, an actual point. All this is familiar designs to the originals, constant nostalgia points in almost every scene, and almost no story so far. The highest point by our opinion in the entire season was the battle with the IG-11 droid, the fight with the Imperial Remnant at the end, and simply seeing the Darksaber. To us it feels like it needs loads more characters and things with a legacy from what happened before in order to make it somewhat interesting, and definitely nothing that will connect it to the sequel trilogy or anything that leads to it whatsoever. Now the music feels nothing like Star Wars, but more like a space rocky theme with some modern crap in it. There are certain parts that we like about it, but overall it makes us cringe with the main theme. Despite all this, which isn't really good, we managed to enjoy The Mandalorian because our standards for Star Wars are the lowest that they've ever been after the amazing final season of the Clone Wars because we know whom we are dealing with. From this point, The Mandalorian can both improve a lot as well as go downhill, although speaking from experience, it will most likely at first start getting better, and then after Disney realizes its success, then identity politics will kick in and make it unwatchable, as it usually goes with Hollywood's systemic brainwashing through the screen.
Villainy wears many masks, none so dangerous as the mask of virtue.
We know that Dave Filoni worked on The Mandalorian, and we really like the guy and admire his work, and the same applies for Jon Favreau, but the thing is, we're still dealing with Disney and Hollywood, which has deteriorated rapidly over the last 10 years into something truly immoral and disgusting. Despite everything that we've said here about The Mandalorian and criticized it, it is not a bad show and it's definitely enjoyable to watch nonetheless, but it's just too... We actually agree with Robothead's video about this topic despite the backlash that he got for it, as did we when we simply shared our thoughts on it. But now the main thing that we don't get here is how overrated it is with Star Wars fans, and we've come to realize that the only reason why everyone is hyping something like this up is only because it's a live-action Star Wars series and nothing else. Most Star Wars fans that love it are saying that Star Wars is back the same way it was said when The Force Awakens was coming out in 2015. Imagine if the garbage show Star Wars Resistance was announced to be a live-action show. Well, it would have been a completely different reaction to it just because of that. We are judging all of these products on their story, what it means in the bigger scale of George Lucas's original 6 movies and the Clone Wars, and what new they add to the Star Wars universe. That is why we really like Jedi Fallen Order, because it succeeds in doing just that, while The Mandalorian adds nothing new that hasn't already existed in Star Wars, and also plays no part in George Lucas's Star Wars, as it's based in the crappy sequel era. In the time between 2005 and 2015, when there was no Star Wars movies, most people thought Star Wars was dead. Well, in fact, it was the golden age of being a Star Wars fan, thanks to the Clone Wars series, the Force Unleashed games, the Star Wars The Old Republic MMORPG game, and the expanded universe. Then when Episode 7 was coming out, everyone thought that Star Wars is supposedly coming back as they didn't care enough to know the Star Wars stories never really went away, but were simply told in a different format. The same thing applies here. Everyone is so hyped about The Mandalorian simply because it's a live-action series and not because it adds something new to Star Wars or has a good story. If the roles were reversed with, for example, Jedi Fallen Order and The Mandalorian, of course the live-action stuff will overshadow the game by a lot. Sadly, it's all become about which format Star Wars content is released in, and not what has the better story, more creativity, and how it serves the overall story of the galaxy far, far away. As far as we're concerned, The Mandalorian should have been a comic book, but if it had an amazing story, the format wouldn't matter to us. Most Star Wars fans have been shitting on Disney's Star Wars since The Last Jedi came out, and we completely support that because they're right to do so, but we just don't understand how easily everyone jumps back on as soon as something so mediocre but live action comes out like a lot of people did. Since the 3rd episode of The Mandalorian came out, we were already hearing how they want a director of that single episode to suddenly direct the whole thing while not realizing that not every single episode is going to have that much action scenes, and to be fair, it's nothing special at all. If you want 10 times better action scenes, turn on Season 5, Episode 14, 15, or 16 of the Clone Wars, and you'll see both action and amazing storytelling. Where are people's brains when it comes to being apologetic about people who will attack on them for not having the right opinion? We are sick and tired of watching history repeat itself over and over again with Star Wars fans because you will all eventually be disappointed, as if we haven't seen this before countless times. Jedi Fallen Order's story came out and it's good, but it's over now. On the other hand, The Mandalorian started clean, but it has a whole lot of room to either improve its story and even more room to eventually get infested by identity politics once the woke-tards realize that everybody is watching it and loving it. We're not saying don't enjoy it, especially since we do to some point, but don't give them so much praise for something that is not that special at all, because then don't expect to get something better since you put your standards so low. Your standards should be much higher, especially due to the things that came before Disney. Regarding Disney's Star Wars, we only stand by Star Wars Rebels, Rogue One, Jedi Fallen Order, the Darth Vader comics, and some tidbits of canon, as all of that doesn't disrespect existing Star Wars and adds a lot to the main plot of it, and are creative in their own way, despite the format in which they are portrayed. Star Wars Rebels may be kinda childish, but it ruins nothing, just adds to the lore. The Clone Wars is not on our list here because it originally isn't Disney's Star Wars at all, except for the final season, which was in fact written before Disney bought it. And that's pretty much it, we said what we needed to say. Now on the other hand, our non-existent expectations worked well with Jedi Fallen Order as it had a really solid story which is untainted by identity politics garbage. Anyway, once your expectations are at the bottom, you have a bigger chance of being surprised that something turned out quite okay and enjoyable. Despite The Mandalorian not being bad, and at the same time not being anything special, don't forget that nothing can top the sequel trilogy being that bad and take the spot of the worst Star Wars products to date. Regarding our headcanon, which we haven't talked about here, it's explained in our Din Djarin backstory video, which you can check out. Anyway guys, if you want to see more videos like this one, which will go much deeper into some serious topics which YouTube doesn't allow on their platform, subscribe to us on BitChute, where free speech actually exists and you're allowed to say what you feel without being censored. So with that said, God bless and see you in another video. You Rebel Scum.
This party's over.